So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Edwin Ayinde Jr. Jones. Mr. Edwin Ayinde Jr. Jones is a seasoned executive with over 3 decades of experience spanning ICT, finance, and fashion. Edwin spearheads HJI with a focus on delivering bespoke solutions and excellence, reshaping B2B landscapes with its blend of business savvy and fashion innovation. Under his leadership, companies he's led have achieved remarkable milestones, including a historic $50 million sales record and a 30% year-on-year revenue growth for startups through advanced technologies. Edwin's commitment to sustainability is evident in reducing carbon emissions by 20% within a year and forging partnerships with leading sustainability NGOs. From Port of Spain to global cities, Edwin's vision promises innovative solutions for a stylish, sustainable future, fostering collaboration as the key to collective success in the dynamic business landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce is pleased to welcome Mr. Edwin Ayinde Jr. Jones to our Mind Your Business series. Take it away, Edwin. Edwin, you have to unmute.
Let's do this again. Thank you. Imagine this. In the next 5 years, 50% of today's jobs will be completely transformed by automation. How can we not just survive, but thrive in a post-change economy? Greetings to all distinguished guests, members of the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I am honored to address you today as we embark on a transformation journey through the post-change economy. In this era of relentless disruption and rapid revolution, our ability to adapt, innovate, and collaborate has ever been more critical. Let us dive into actionable strategies that insightful case studies and illuminate the path of sustainable success in this dynamic landscape. This is what I want to engage us about today in terms of how do we unpack this? How do we get into the mindset, the readiness, and more importantly, how do we identify change and how do we pivot for success? What does all of this mean in reality? What does it mean to us? How all of this stuff comes into fruition? How do we bring about these things? How do we realize it? So we're gonna be going through here in the next hour or so and unpacking these things, and hopefully we'll have some questions in the end and then we can dive in. But I'm just gonna give you guys some information to draw us in a bit, to paint a picture in each person's mind. I want the audience to walk away with a sense of a renewed perspective on what change is and how can we develop our own strategies to sustainable success. Today, we're going to be looking at basically 3 key points over the next 60 minutes or so. We're going to embrace adaptability and innovation. We're going to look at learning from diverse industries, and we're going to look at how do we foster the entrepreneurial spirit, the mindset, the collaboration. You know, these are a lot of things, but what I want to really land here today in this conversation, this dialogue between us, is really my experience and how it all started. And for me, it's very dynamic. I was very fortunate to have upbringing that allowed me to be submerged, and emerge out of diversification. Growing up in the streets of Port of Spain, up until I was like about 13 years old, we lived where today is known as Brandara Promenade, but back then to me it was known as the Drive, and that's where we lived and worked. That was the birthplace of what we know today as Heather Jones International, HJI. And in that space and in that time, in the mid-70s, we were at a change perspective coming out of just in 1965, gaining independence. So we were still in post-colonial Trinidad and Tobago at that time. And a lot of shifting and moving and ideas were coming out in the most diverse ways, expressions. And some of us may understand this time, some of us may have been old enough back then to have experienced this. But most importantly, what I really want to talk about is coming from that perspective of post-colonial, and now we are in an independent state. We're talking about post-change versus pivotal change. And how does that conversation come into an economy discussion? And often we tend to link economy and finance and banking and money and all these different conversations, but they're different disciplines. They are not the same, just as post-change versus pivotal change is not the same. And when we speak about economy in this way, we're talking, what are the opportunities? Are we gaining opportunities from a position of lack, where things are absent, where resources are not abundant, and we develop from that space? Or are we developing from a 1+ space, where we're saying, okay, we must have this in order to get this? Where are we? And all of that conversation is a conversation that I want to unpack and give everybody an opportunity to revisit in their minds how they see change and what does change represent to them, and how to identify areas from their own experience that will give them information and guidance in terms of how they're going to move forward with this. But before we dive into all the strategies and mastering post-change economy, let's examine the difference between post-change and pivotal change economies. Post-change economies, these economies have already undergone significant transformation, right? So that's kind of like what I was saying before in terms of the transformation of Trinidad and Tobago, going from being a colonized territory into now an independent state, moving into a sovereign state of now becoming a nation in the sense of its own identity, its own autonomy, and forging forward into the change or pivoting into becoming a republic as we know it today. Transformation are now in the phases of stability or new normal, right? So we have this way how we look at it. Different things happen and then it shifts what we understood. We have new information, there's new perspective, there's new growth, there's new awareness, and we coin that now the new normal. So whatever we knew before, we have now reached a space to where things have taken on a new paradigm in terms of our perspective, awareness, and things are now different. But thinking of Western European countries after the Industrial Revolution, or Japan after the World War II, they have made pivotal changes and are different in phase of development. So I want to pause there for a minute and let's absorb that for a minute, because it's a lot of things that we need to reflect on and digest. So change happens, but it happens like peeling an onion. So we're gonna, for the next 5 minutes or so, I'm gonna unpeel this onion of change versus pivotal change, so that we can start digesting and seeing the layers as they unfold in terms of what does this really mean and how does this information impact us. And I will share from that my experience and how these changes and transformation, how did they occur and mold and shape into who I am today and my very, very diverse background, coming from starting in the early days of my career at 18 years old. I joined the military, moved into corporate America, and worked my way through that space, and then returned into, but before all of that, I was born into what we know today as Heather Jones. Back then it was E&H Jones, and then that evolved into Heather Jones Designs, and then again into Heather Jones International. So the evolution of my history, my existence is one of constant evolution and transformation and change. And then that allowed, from an instinctive perspective, to understand, identify, recognize the change that's coming, and positioning and possession of one's awareness, one's understanding in terms of clarity, the ability to create from in that space, and also to balance yourself in terms of, clearly defining in terms of navigation, because that navigation is no longer right or wrong, good or bad, but it's a navigation of how do one understand where they're at in the exact moment, and staying present to be able to maneuver through this change or pivotal change. So as we discussed before, in terms of the change economy, now we're going to take a look at the pivotal change economy. On the other hand, pivotal change economies are crucial juncture, right? Facing significant challenges, opportunities. Examples include emerging markets like India or Brazil, where decisions made today will shape the economy futures tomorrow. Right? These types of changes, we need to understand them, because as we think, so we become in that perspective. But most importantly, as we are capable to witness, to observe, to get ourselves into that space of awareness, and then gain the level of clarity required to create informed decisions and positions. Adaptability and innovation are the left and right, the yin and yang. It's the balance of how do we apply what we understand, and how quickly can we apply it, and what is the catalyst or the thing that moves us in a particular way that allow us to innovate and adapt, which is two separate disciplines, two distinct disciplines working together in an opposing fashion, right? As we understand that behavior of how to adapt and innovate at the same time, it gives us a clear understanding in terms of really settling ourselves in terms, what is the strategic adaptability? How do you achieve that? What are some of the practical ways that we can unpack that awareness, that understanding that gives us this? For me, it was like simply growing up in a time where being observant or developing the skill to be observant, to see things objectively without involving one's own intention or staying still, so not getting involved in any or making any movement until that what is happening was clear, and then using that information in the quickest possible way, swift action, to make some strategic moves that we call adaptability. And what we're looking at here is that distraction is the first point of call in understanding or in awareness of when we're dealing with change or pivotal change. And the difference between the two is pivotal change is where you stay anchored, just like you see the NBA players or players playing basketball. They will use one foot will be planted and the other foot they will move, while they look and they use their view. So they develop a sense, they can scan quickly to see who is open, where they are open, and what is the best possible pass that they can make to deliver the ball to their teammate to advance the goal towards scoring. And this is really what it's about in terms of pivotal change. So pivotal change is really being able to have a sense of view. So we must be aware in what we're looking at and looking at it in a way to understand the easiest way, the shortest path, least path of resistance to deliver or to pass, or in terms of whatever we want to do. Now, in doing that, we're going to unpack a little bit here. So here's a profound analogy that I want to leave you guys with, and possibly even make a note of it, because this would probably be the most profound thing I would like to share with you guys. Change involves a negotiation with oneself or others involved. Recognizing potential barriers or resistant points is crucial, much like in a negotiation where understanding the other party's objection is key. By addressing these concerns and finding common ground, one can pave way for acceptance. Ultimately, change is a declaration of balance, of empathy, communication, and compromise, right? So understanding that, we get to sense to know that first thing we need to look at when we're talking about this is not what is going to change, but what is not going to change. So I'm going to repeat that again. The focus should always be on what is not going to change. We have to look at and identify the things that are going to be true today, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, and beyond. We want to look at those things that are constant, and then we start developing around those constants, because that is going to give us our pivoting or anchor point, and it will allow us to have different perspective or views on what is coming next. And then we can choose from that perspective that gives us a clear vision, a clear view in how we're going to develop this. But it requires planning, right? This is a planning. And when we talk about planning, it really just talks about never giving up. That practice of always seeking to have a plan that one can reflect on, fall back on, that guide, that will constant thing. So, and inside of that, once we identify those constraints or those things that are not going to change, then we can put that into our planning structure. Once we have that identified, which is based on the external data, we can move into the other side of it, which is the adaptability, which says always let go. So whilst we will plan the things we want to do, we do not want to any specific outcome, because the outcome of events are not within our control. And there are things outside of our control that we want to be clear about and identify those things as not to get involved with it or allow it to distract us, right? Adaptability requires us to have the ability to let go of the fear, to let go of the need or that must win at all costs, must prove at all costs, must be right at all costs. Those mindsets and that perspective that I can speak for myself is that the faster you can recover or the faster you can adapt and overcome, that adaptability requires you to let go. Think about it as climbing a stair, and if you're or a ladder, you must let go in order to keep moving. Yeah. So adaptability is based on that personal and ability to develop one's own skill in terms of where we are and how we see ourselves in that space. But as we go through this, we want to be clear on what's the formula? How do we do this? It's a lot of conversation here. And what I will say to you guys is this. First, you have to be clear on movement. So let's start there. Movement leads us into going from point A to point B, and even possibly on to point C and etc. But movement is filled with distraction. So as we start with that distraction, and distraction is one of the constant things that are not going to change. So distraction is like a pillar or like a universal law. Distraction is always going to be there in every single thing we do. So we have to look at that to understand when you see distraction, that's your opportunity to start looking for traction. Because inside of distraction, you're going to find traction. Traction means the step, the path, what to do next, how to do it next. How do I go from this industry to that industry? What gives me some insight on to make that switch, that change, that move? How do I pivot even in my own industry? How do I go from doing XYZ to doing LMNOP, right? And inside of that distraction thing, I want us to embrace the distraction because it actually comes inside of it something valuable. But we must understand how to maneuver in that space and what it is we need to unpack when we see distraction at the door or we encounter distraction. I want us not to confuse the movement that we make in terms of our busyness, our day-to-day busy lives and all the different things we're looking at. We want to look at what is the real, how do we move from, and this is the movement part, from a distracted state into a traction state, which is what are the steps, what are the guides, what are the specific things we need to do, and then implement those things. In that becomes now action that leads us to progress. On the other side, it needs to be balanced with intention. So we need to have a clear intention on what we want to do. And then we need to understand what it is we want to do, why we want to do it, and who do we need to become. Yeah, so the formula is y plus what plus y plus who equals what, when and where. And the intention becomes now attention, because once you have that intention and you take the first steps to work out that formula, it automatically gives you the result of when and where, and that's when the action comes in. We always hear about the right timing and the right synchronization and when to move and when to not move. It's actually a formula-based process, and once we understand this, we can easily position ourselves to take possession, to move or advance through whatever the space or navigation or realities or situations that we may face in terms of understanding this. Yeah. That allows us now to understand from an internal perspective, what is the negotiation that we need to make with ourselves to understand what are going to be some of the objections, things that we may want to do, but in a disagreement in doing it because there are some other things we need to solve. So once we can solve these things, we can move on in that way. Again, I don't want to say this, don't confuse movement with progress, because we can be quite busy, but not really making any genuine progress in the efforts or towards the objective or objective results that we hope for. The other aspect of it is the importance of purposeful action. So we need to always be clear where our intention and attention is to make sure that it aligns with some purposeful action that we can measure, because all of this has to be measurable. And some of us here may understand and worked with SMART goals, and that gives us our clear perspective in terms of how to measure this thing, how to see, how to look at it from being specific, measurable, attainable, and so forth. That allows us to understand. The power of adaptability. So that's where we get to from that. So once you get through that first step of awareness, clearness, understanding how to apply it, you're using the formula, it puts you in a position of power, right? And it allows you to build the level of resilience, insight, and success stories that you hope for. Now, saying all of this is that this helps us to simplify our move, because one of the constraints or constant things in life is change. So this is going to be one of the pillars that you have to implement in your plan, that things will change and it will always change, and change is constantly changing. It's in a perpetual state of transition. It's a never-ending process that we will have to live with in terms of where we are, how we do things, what we hope for. So we have to plan with change in mind, right? So simplest way I like to look at it from my experience is that I will always plan with the end in mind, right? And that gives us a lot of things to look at. And the first time that lesson became very real, or I learned that, this would have been the 4th of December, 1995. I landed in Bosnia for the first time. That was my first deployment. And when we left, I left from California, Fort Irwin, and we flew from there to Bosnia. And when we land, the debrief that we got in Fort Irwin and when we got to Bosnia was two different things. So, and that was a very difficult thing for me on a personal level, because what we were told is that when we left California is that we were going to support the persons who were being victims or being affected by the genocide taking place and the ethnic fallout that was taking place with the Bosnians and the Chechens. And then later on, when we got into Bosnia, we found out that it really was an evacuation exercise to evacuate persons that the government and powers to be had determined these persons were to be evacuated, and in such a manner where it was discriminatory, because we had to focus only on moving persons who were on the list. So even if those persons had loved ones that did not make it onto the list for whatever reason, they were not afforded the protection and the evacuation. So sharing that very personal thing with you guys here today to give you the understanding of change and how things change and how do you have to adapt. And sometimes things in that very dramatic sense, one have to understand how to be resilient, use insight, and how to let go. At that point, I must be honest, it was very difficult It was a very difficult lesson for me to understand, because what we hoped for and what we signed up for, in the end, it was a different mission, and we just had to switch our mindsets and condition ourselves to follow what was the new directives. Similar to that, during COVID and 19 and the pandemic, many businesses had to quickly adapt their operations to remote work and digital sale channels and all these different things. It was a lot of unknown. It was uncertainty, a lot of loss. So that presented us with a dynamics where resilience had to play a really big part, because none of us knew what, how, when we were going to be able to see. A lot of us lost a lot of loved ones, and the economy as a whole was impacted, because the economy stopped. We stopped participating in opportunities because of the restrictions. According to McKinsey, companies that prioritize adaptability are 1.5 times more likely to emerge as leaders in their industry after a crisis. Yeah. Looking at that statement, it gives us a sense of what is our likelihood to emerge after a crisis. And a crisis can be from, you know, a loved one transitioning on to so many other things in the space that happens in a day-to-day life that now challenge us in terms of a crisis, whether personally or from a business perspective, that we now need to look at and pick up the pieces and keep moving, right? The idea here is really to start thinking with the end in mind and understanding that prioritizing adaptability is key, and that is one of the things that is never going to change, and it should be something that I hope we can embrace. And from that, what we get is the resilience, the insight, and we are able to develop now the success stories that will continue to drive our confidence in understanding this. Example, when we look at companies like Zoom and Netflix that rapidly adapted the increasing demand for remote communication entertainment prospectively. So we would have seen in that space, using the pandemic as an example, how the power of adaptability works, and how we can look at it from a personal perspective as well as in our workplace. If we are entrepreneurs, if we are business owners, depending on where you are, it allows you to now look at your priorities and input adaptability as one of the key things that we need to look at, so that in that shift from typical to ideal, from a state of, how we do it and what is the best practice in practice sort of thinking, or at least have those questions as we move forward. Lessons I can share with you guys from the fashion industry. As I told you guys, I was born into fashion. My mom and my dad, they started out. My mom used to collect scraps of leather and make stuff from it, crochet. Later on, she started to use different types of flowers and fruits that will stain to do fabric, in terms of different styles of batik and tie-dye and staining and stuff like that. And the lessons out of that came out in terms of today, even back then, where there were not any conversations around sustainability and all of these different things. The ability to use lack of resources, access. Lack is actually one of our pivotal tools that we all should look towards, because it really helps us. And as we say, necessity is the mother of invention. And to just unpack that into one word, it's really talking about lack. So when we in a space, when we look at what are we lacking here, what is missing, what is absent, what is the key things, what is the key activities, what's the key resources, what is the key benefits of what we need to look at, especially in this fast-paced nature that we are in, where things are no longer, as Malcolm Gladwell would put it, one needs to spend 10,000 hours to become in the top 1% in one's field. Now everything is speed to market. And the fashion industry has now gone, just like the fast food industry, into fast fashion, right? So the fashion industry is known for fast-paced change and trends, teaching us lessons about agility and quick decision-making. So for me, now growing up in the business, had an opportunity to go away, having the opportunity to work in other industries, and then now coming back at the helm, what I would have learned would have really tapped me back into my informative years of growing up, or my first 16, 17 years of being in the fashion industry from a child until that age. It really set a pace for me to understand and identify that what we call agility now, that quick decision making. We want to look at or take that lesson away from the fashion industry in terms of how styles and trends and seasons and planning. And if we take that away from just the glitz and glam and the niceties of it and really strip it back a bit and leverage from it, what we will see is that ability to look at fashion as a global industry, valued at 2.5 trillion in 2020, right? Highlighting its significant impact on the global economy. So in that space, what that allows us is understand that one of the lessons is fashion is beyond attire. It's an industry. So from the farmers to the accountants, to the lawyers, to the buyers, to the guy driving the truck, to the lights, camera, action people, fashion is a multifaceted industry that allows us entry into things in that, from that, there are opportunities that we can look at. And that lesson there is that we have to look at all the different spaces we are in and look at the industry of it and see all the linkages and connections to be able to scan quickly and pivot as we need to connect in opportunities or to connect in terms of moving, advancing, upskilling ourselves into or including retooling what our purpose is in terms of what problems or what opportunities are there for us to solve. So in the fashion industry, I think if we look at brands like Zara and H&M, what they did, they quickly pivoted into data analytics, and they became more of a data analytics and supply chain group. And they optimize, and this allowed them to optimize quickly and change and adapt to the change in consumer preferences. And what that allowed them in that understanding is to use not what the creative side of it, but they pivoted into looking at it from a more data and supply chain perspective, and perfected that within their model. And that would have shown them to be similar to right now within HCI, undergoing a transformation, been in existence now for 5 decades and approaching in this time and space to where we are looking at how do we now pivot from just simply attire, but really looking at how does fashion and the fashion industry play a role and contribute to a thriving economy in this space. One of the ways that HGI is answering those questions is through technology. And we're using technology as a catalyst for change. The rise of e-commerce platforms like Amazon and has transformed the retail industry, emphasizing on the importance of technology in driving change. But what it also did, it also gave birth to things like Shein and Nova, and a lot of different companies that are now in that fast fashion space where things are now a lot quicker, quick speed to market, and bulk-driven online presence. However, our core is still the same. We are still going to stay true to our customization. We're still going to stay true to cut and flow. We're still going to stay true to what is haute couture, or in this modern language, slow fashion. And why we're going to stay there is simply because in the global digital transformation technology, we are looking at, it's projected to reach 2.3 trillion by 2023, right? Indicating widespread adoption to technology across industries. Therefore, what is going to happen in this space is that the need for things to get done quickly, more efficiently, the supply chain logistics, all these things are going to drive a number of different factors. However, quality, reliability, relevance, convenience, those things are not going to change. So in this fast fashion, pace-driven technology, information, data, consumer behavior, that we see still a clear path for us to stay in terms of high quality and access, leverage, and learn lessons from diverse economies into diverse industries that will give us success, similar to if we look at the success story of John Paul Diore, the founder of Paul Mitchell, which is a famous Paul Mitchell cosmetics. They made shampoo and conditioner and a lot of things within the hair industry and hairdressing industry. Also, Patron Tequila Industries, which is also part of their product offering. So you went from one level of being a hairdresser and selling hair products into tequila, into alcohol. And in his story, he shows the importance of perseverance and determination in terms of achieving the entrepreneurial success. And pretty interesting story with this guy in terms of how they were able to connect the dots between these two very different things. But the idea came from the same thing. When your industry is changing, the diversification creates synergies or linkages or opportunities to link between two worlds that would not exist organically or naturally, but it allows you to build bridges or connections or linkages between these two things. And by doing so, you forge a new platform, a new perspective, a new connection, a new space where you can move in between. And this is all part of the change economy and post-change economy and pivoting. So you know exactly where you can pivot, because now you can see how the things are lining up. And in that space, what happens, you're allowed to develop billionaires worldwide, many of whom build their wealth through entrepreneurship. And really what that means is that, all it really means is that persons would have been able to sit down into a space and look at the shifting and moving and the dynamics of how things are moving too. Yeah. Developing the entrepreneur mindset is natural in the sense of, once you can identify yourself as someone in a space that's capable of solving problems, then we can move in terms of entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, that demonstrating the importance of that. So these are just some of the ideas that we can go through in terms of The other ideas is in terms of how do we overcome adversity, in terms of, and we can look in terms of how we see, in terms of research by Harvard shows effectively manage that adversity are more likely to emerge stronger. So we want to look at these things in that way. Product innovation, right? As we look at coming out of that diversification, we want to now look at how do we innovate? How do we use what's existing and build on it? We see things in terms of this, but one of the things I want to look at is in terms of understanding. Change really deals with understanding, in this case, between these two disciplines, which is branding and marketing. Developing your own brand in terms of your own personal brand, and then by extension, your company or where you are, the market disciplines and all those things. We need to understand the difference. And these things are tools or things that you're going to be able to hold on to guide us. Yeah, in terms of the difference between branding is why, marketing is how, branding is long-term, marketing is short-term. And once we start to get into those dynamics, we can see the way in terms of how things that were previously hidden or outside of our view now become very clear, and we can now move towards it with the right intention and pay the attention to the areas that's needed. So that is part of the understanding and awareness in terms of fostering the entrepreneurial mindset. Based on how we want to look at, from that will lead us in terms of what we want to look at in terms of our sales, our marketing strategies, what will work in terms of that environment. Again, it will be informed based on the branding is a continuous thing, the marketing is short-term, branding is trajectory, and the other one is the tactics in terms of how we market and move through stuff. Like, for instance, Coca-Cola advertising campaigns would have contributed to the global brand recognition. So everybody's familiar with that, right? In terms of advertising valued at 530 billion in 2020. So we see some cases of digital marketing like Facebook and Google Ads enabling companies to target specific demographics. So if we look at that disruption there in that place, you don't need to have those enormous budgets again in order to get your things where you need to go. You just have to know specifically who are your target audience and create the right communication that will attract. And that within itself is a pivot in terms of how you look at spending, how you look at sales and marketing, which are two very separate disciplines within itself, and how those disciplines work. As we start getting into that, we start seeing the philanthropy part, and in terms of how that will work out in terms of giving back, and how does that help us to create our passive impact versus the active impact in terms of creating that attraction and awareness to what we want to do in terms of, charitable giving and so forth. And how does that play in terms of our change and pivot perspective in terms of what we want to do and how we want to do it. Resilience and adaptability, again, if we look at this as a whole, we will be able now to reflect on it in terms of research done by PricewaterhouseCoopers found that 75% of CEOs that identified agility at the most important characteristics in navigating uncertainty. So what we want to look at is fostering that resilience and adaptability so that we can create that agility to move quickly, to take by understanding the landscape, being able to scan it from different point of views, being able to mean where this perspective as a way to guide us through this post-change economies and implement the strategies that we are looking at. All right, so that will sort of round up my presentation at this point, and I will hand it over to the moderator, Ramon, and we can open for questions or any information, any area that would like to dive in more and share a bit with you guys. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Edwin, for that insightful presentation. Now, I'd like to open up the floor to our participants. Any questions we have for Edwin? We have a 5 to 10 minute window for questions. Any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or feel free to open your mics and ask any particular question you may have of Edwin at this point in time. I can get started. Edwin, I want to ask you a question. You talk a lot about data analytics and in different phases, in the adaptability phase, in that phase of being resilient. Could you tell us more about how you use data analytics in your day-to-day work and what you do, especially as it relates to the fashion industry?
Yeah, so for instance, one of the ways how I'm using data analytics right now and how I'm positioning HI into data analytics is through the metaverse and using gaming platforms, right? So currently there's about 9 billion persons or 9 billion people in the world, right? And out of that 9 billion, we're looking at maybe 5 billion are gamers, right? They're playing on some gaming platform. Based on the metaverse and virtual reality spaces, we are using data analytics to understand consumer behaviors, to understand what they are into, what are the trends, what have their interests, and we can use that now to understand where our trends need to be in terms of that, or even test the market space without having to go through the typical production cycle. So data analytics for us is actually a tool in our manufacturing process that allows us to try before you buy, right? And then it allows us to gain insightful information from the customer's behavior. So it's one thing to just create whether clothes and put it up on a site or put it in a store and people come and buy it. But where does those persons go? Where are they buy it? Okay, you went to a wedding. Okay, great. How was the wedding? Whose wedding it is? Right? And that gives us a part now to understand that. So once we can get that level of information through data analytics, now we can engage on a customer relationship building journey with that customer, right? And then we can add value based on understanding what is taking place. So for instance, whose wedding it is. Okay, it was my sister's wedding. Okay, great. So we know now that you wear this dress to your sister's wedding. And then from that, it gives us a number of different things to understand. Are you married yourself? And then we now know your sister's anniversary is coming up. So that's another opportunity for engagement. So what it really does, data analytics really gives us a clear path to understanding what the consumer needs are and what the pain points are. And it allows you to solve those things in a way that you can solve problems before the customer even know they have these problems. And that gains trust. And it not only gains trust, it creates a residual relationship in terms of the business.
That's that, Edwin. Any questions from anyone on the panel here this afternoon?
Hi guys, Brent here. I have a quick question.
Hi, good night, Brent.
Yeah. Hi, good night. In terms of the theme of the webinar that is being hosted, right? And it's about post-change economy and strategies for sustainable success. In terms of AI and the effect and impact it having on the world at large, I wouldn't even say Trinidad, but the world at large. In terms of having some form of regulations in terms of how it's actually being implemented into the Caribbean country in terms of data privacy and so forth. How will that basically, or what's your thought on that impacting the economy on a whole in terms of, let's say, we have an improvement of less labor force, but it'll also have a different effect in terms of the overall state of the economy, both benefits and also disadvantages. What's your thoughts on that?
All right, so as I opened out my presentation and saying in the next 5 years, 50% of the jobs will be automated. So that is where I started leading to. So what that means is that persons have to now retool, reskill themselves. The technology now gives you efficiency, accuracy. So it puts us away from guesstimation, and it puts us away from excessive waste. So in my space, I can talk about fashion, right? So what AI will do for us is give us, I can use AI to measure you without, right as we speak. So I can just say, okay, stand up, do an infrared scan, get a perfect fit of you, and produce something without ever having to come in contact. So that saves fuel. Besides that, it also gives me a precise measurement into the tech pack. So areas like that. But what happens now is that the manual labor force will be impacted. And what the manual labor force has to understand now is how to reposition themselves in terms of upskilling their talent pool to be able to manage the areas that the AI cannot. And it gives them more time to do that and increase a level of quality within their life. So what that means is simply, if you would spend in, let's say you're going to write a book and you're going to spend, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months to write a book, within the AI principles, you could probably turn that out in 2 weeks, a month, so to speak, right? What that allows you to do now is to think more about the content and really connect on the human level to make sure that your content is more impactful. So you spend more time being impactful than spend all the time causing the negative impacts. So one of the places that AI will play for us is really to allow us to gain or arrest time, because we always talk about time management, but time management is really a hoax. It's not real, because you can't add or take away from it. It's the same amount and the specific amount. But what it does is that it gives us ability to have energy management. So we can manage our energy. AI allows us to gain back that quality of time for ourselves and focus really on delivering that within our products. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yes, it does. And also there's a little spin-off of it. The reason why the question come about is that due to the same way as AI, you have the chat GPTs, you have a whole bunch of different AI that is basically to the public at large. I know that in Europe right now, and I know also a lot of the first worlds, they are writing a lot of legislation where they're limiting the use of the AI also, because it could be a little misleading. And I know eventually I had a conversation with someone with Central Bank where they're trying to have legislation that replicating what is taking place in first world countries. So let's say, for instance, you have a support, like we say, you're selling a product, but you need to have a 24-hour online facility to have someone to give that support. You have a chat box. That chat
Right.
box basically going to give you automatic responses. However, they are basically having legislation where there's a certain amount of flexibility in terms of providing that support, because it could be a little misleading. And I'm not talking about the chatbot giving you information, but the way that the AI is being used, and also how that's going to basically affect Trinidad, which is like we're trying to get to that first world status, which will eventually come to us at the end of the day. So I mean, just to incorporate the change in the economy, the change in artificial intelligence at the same point in time, that we don't breach any legislation and so forth, but appreciate it. Because I mean, what you just mentioned there is like really remarkable, to just get someone information. Like, when I think some of these platforms have it where you could put a picture of your foot and you're seeing your shoes fitting how it look, which is really remarkable. Yeah, so that definitely answered the question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's good. The AI aspect is, just to touch on that quickly, it does need governance. Everything needs to be managed, right? So all of this has to be a level of best practice in practice, and accountability, responsibility aspects needs to be governed. However, it's a tool that I believe will give us back our humanity and allow us to really spend time in a quality way and impact on the society, and it will cut back down a lot of things that we see negative in terms of emissions, pollutions, a lot of waste that we have now. We can look at it in that way, but it definitely have opportunities where it can be misused and needs to be governed carefully. Any other persons with any questions?
Hi, Mr. Jones. This is Harnath here. Quick question.
Hi,
I wanted to get some understanding in terms of the nuts and bolts of data analytics. Is there any specific platform or software that you can recommend, or something to that effect, that can be of useful use for this particular gathering here?
Yeah, it depends. There's a lot of platforms out there for data analytics, but the key thing is, and just to be careful with that, there's not a one size fit all or a single brush. It depends on your individual specific market niche and so forth. So if you're in the financial space, there's data analytics for that, versus if you are in, like for me, in the fashion space and the unconventional places where you're going to get this. So for instance, if you're in the financial market, I will put you towards areas where software such as that deals like Plaid. Plaid is a good example where you can get a lot of data analytics, because it deals with the unbanked population, right? Versus if you are coming into from the financial, if you want to say, okay, let's deal with fashion, you can look at games such as Roblox as a way where you're seeing a lot of fashion companies are now engaging in the games where you can buy things, and now you have the other ones that everyone is known, which is Facebook, Instagram, that also gives you a lot of analytics. So depending on where you are and what you're doing, that conversation has to be something very specific, because there are a number of different solutions, and there's a number of different open software solutions that we can look at. But specifically what you want to look at, depending on the industry, you want to look at who are the disruptors, and the disruptors are the ones where it has the most vast pool today, in that in terms of where you could get that information you're looking for, that analytic data. Because what it does, it tracks behaviors. One of the biggest things is like API. right? In having an API, or what an API is basically is like a digital butler, but because it touches between the consumer and the service provider, it collects and stores all that data. So when you're talking about this conversation, it's not just a single solution, or it's a stack or vertical stack solution you will have to automate within your business in order to achieve what it is you want to get from it. And then obviously you have companies like Lucent Systems where you can reach out as well. But the truth and fact of the matter, just to be responsible about this answer, analytics comes from a number of different areas. We just have to tie it into a specific area. But just to kind of give the sense of the audience, Google, Facebook, some of the provide a lot of great insights. Gaming platforms provide a lot of great insights in terms of analytics. And then you have some of the fintechs like Plaid, which is one of my favorite. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you very much for that, Edwin. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being part of our session this afternoon. We have room for one more question. And I want to really thank Edwin for talking and preaching about data analytics, because that is the data, as it says, the new oil. And you have to be able to understand your consumer, understand their needs, understand their motivations, understand your clients, to be able to really meet them on their level, to be able to compete effectively in your market space. Incidentally, that's one of the upcoming sessions. We won't give too much, let the cat out of the bag just yet. One of the sessions in June will be about data analytics and understanding data and what it could do for you as an entrepreneur. Now, we're going to take one more question, and we have Alma Thompson. Her hand is raised. Alma, feel free to ask your question.
Hi, it's not a question. It's just to endorse how very helpful AI is. I am in the medical sector, but specialist, and we have started using AI at both, different aspects in it. One, for instance, that is very easy to use is ChatGPT, and you can get the free version. And what it does, where before, we used to employ an agency to do stuff. We are doing stuff on our own, and we would write our stuff, and then ChatGPT would set in and look at it and give you options. And it is proving to be very, very useful. And of course, very, I wouldn't say cheaper, but overall, I mean, it impacts your bottom line. And given what we've all been through with COVID, anything that you can do, but on top of it, it is useful, to be ahead of the technology. And as Edwin says, you have all the various media, socially, so that it is something to look at and which can benefit us all in our respective industries. That's my comment.
Thank you very much for that, Alma. Any final comments, Edwin, before we close?
Yeah, data is currency. Data is currency. So I could just simply say, information becomes energy, and energy is a universal currency. So once you are armed with the clarity of what data provides, it allows you to scan quickly and move in an agile way to maneuver through whatever it is, whatever the field is, or whatever that barrier to entry might have been, or rethink how we are doing things. And that's really what, and I'll just end on this, what AI gives us is the ability to really think through things whilst being able to move quickly. So it improves our efficiency.
And with that, we'd like to thank Mr. Edwin Jones. Thank you very much, sir, for your contribution, for your keen insights, and for all of the nuggets that were shared this afternoon. I'm sure our audience would agree with me that I think we are much wiser, 60 minutes wiser about the post-economy and some of the strategies utilized, specifically in the fashion industry. And I'd like to thank all the participants for coming on this evening. I know you have a lot of busy schedules, and thanks for taking the time to come on to our Mind Your Business series on behalf of the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Thank you very much, Edwin. And the recording for the session will be available by early next week. So feel free to write us, email us, and we'll send you a copy for your records and for your own perusal. And you could pick apart some of the comments and feedback from Edwin and apply them to your business as you continue to mind your business. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Edwin, do have a good evening. Everyone, have a good evening. And we look forward to, stay tuned. We have a few more Mind Your Business series. But before we do that, we have our inaugural wind ball cricket competition on behalf of the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce, taking place on the 30th of May at the UE St. Augustine Administrative Field. That's the front field as you enter the campus from the main road. So feel free to participate, feel free to pass through. Check us out, come and swing a ball, come and bowl a ball, swing a bat. And we're looking forward to interacting and continue to network with our Tunapuna business community. Ladies and gentlemen, do have a good evening. And I look forward to engaging you in the near future. Have a good one.
Peace and blessings.
All right. Bye, everyone. Enjoy your night. Bye.